everyone, and welcome to Food for Life. I'm Ashley Chesley, and I'm your host. I know I've gotten some new viewers recently, and I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I am a personal chef and food educator by trade, so I love to share things about all health and wellness. I also have MS, so I also have a lot of clients that have health problems, and I love healthy food, and I love the way that healthy food makes our body feel from the inside out. I always say healthy starts from the inside out. And I always give the example that we always know these marathon runners or people that are super healthy. And because they work out all the time, they're like, well, I can eat whatever I want. So I definitely like to teach people how to be healthy and be fit and enjoy life. Life is a balance. I'm not going to tell you can't have your wine or a piece of chocolate. Don't worry. But I'm happy you guys are joining us today. For our new and existing viewers, we have a wonderful guest. Her name is Dr. Jennifer Sowards. We're going to be talking about audiology, and May is Speech and Hearing Awareness Month. I think I got that right. I'll have to ask her when she joins us. But right after these messages, we will be back with her. Dr. Jennifer, how are you today? And thank you for joining us.
Hi there. Thank you, Ashley. I'm doing great. Appreciate being able to be a guest on the show.
So did I get this right? May is Better Hearing and Speech Awareness Month?
It is. So most people don't think about hearing and speech being related, but there's, the aspect of hearing really lays a lot of the foundation for language acquisition, language development in children. And so the two are kind of joined together this month for awareness, just to make sure that people are able to hear as well as communicate effectively.
Before we go into all the details of what you do and who and everything, let's tell everybody who you are. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, what you like, got any hobbies, and a family? Tell us everything.
Of course, yeah. So I'm by trade an audiologist. I've also been, I was talking to a colleague earlier today, and this month marks 20 years since I graduated into this field with my doctorate.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
So it feels, it's kind of like, oh, wow, it's been 20 years. So where did the time go? But it's been a great field. And one of the ways that I became interested in this is I started wearing hearing aids in both ears as a kid. So I was about 6 when they first identified my hearing loss. So I kind of grew up in those sound booths, people pressing the button for the beep. Like that's where I spent a lot of time as a kid. And I think it really sparked my interest in the field and being able to help people like me and learn more about all of the different facets. So that's kind of the professional part. And then personally, I'm married to a wonderful person, my partner, Nicole, and we have 2 kiddos. They're 10 and 2, so they keep me very busy. A big gap in age.
Yeah, that's a big gap. It is. So yeah, running to practice the other side.
Indeed. Yeah. Just like, taking my daughter to soccer and then chasing the little guy around the field to make sure he doesn't go help, and then on the private side, kind of for fun, I really enjoy bird watching, hiking, riding my bike. So just really being out in nature and enjoying all the kind of forest bathing. And I think one of the things that really I enjoy is with the sounds of nature. So like the birds and hearing the wind in the trees and how it kind of changes throughout the different seasons. So yeah, that's what I enjoy doing on my spare time.
That's great. I love that, chasing after the little one so he doesn't go help.
Uh-huh.
Well, he wants to play with his sister.
Indeed. Yeah, he would love to. And he's her biggest fan. Yeah. Yeah.
That's so cute.
Uh-huh.
Now, you obviously been through your personal journey with hearing loss, and you've had that. What caused you to lose your hearing?
They don't really know, honestly. There's no family history of any kind of childhood hearing loss or anything like that. There's a couple of guesses, but that's really what it is. I did have scarlet fever when I was about 3, so it's possible that may have contributed. But they didn't, back in those days, they didn't do what they do nowadays, which is, when someone is born, they have a program called universal hearing screening. So for babies that are born in a hospital, their hearing is screened before they go home. And so that allows them to catch any hearing loss, obviously, very, very early, because it's so critical to start the intervention very early before it starts to affect speech production and language acquisition and that sort of thing. So when I was born many, many years ago, that was before the advent of the universal newborn hearing screening program. So it's possible I was born with the hearing loss, but we have no way of knowing because I wasn't tested. So,
Wow. I mean, I guess there isn't really definitive answers for a lot of things in life.
mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
how did you adjust as you grew up? Because I mean, that's a lot of testing and figuring out. And as a kid, I mean, being in school and there's all kinds of noises and kids are loud and
Oh,
rowdy.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's really been, like I mentioned before, I've been doing this for 20 years now. And I've really been amazed over the last 20 years what has happened with how the hearing aid technology has changed and improved. And certainly when we go back to 40 years ago, when I first started, the hearing devices that I had as a kid, they were analog, just an amplifier that made everything louder by the same amount. Sometimes I would be in a classroom and the teacher, this is in the 70s and 80s, the teacher would be talking to the chalkboard. So their back is turned and they're writing on the chalkboard. And so, I'd be straining to hear, and I would turn my hearing aid up with the volume wheel in order to try to understand my teacher more clearly. And then the kid next to me would, drop a book or something like that. And because the hearing aid wasn't smart enough to differentiate, like, okay, so that was already loud, it would turn up the book dropping sound by the same amount it had been turning up the teacher's voice. So, it's this really loud kind of sound, and I'm trying to turn it down. So, flash forward 40 years to now, and the devices have an automatic volume control that works in, fractions of milliseconds, much faster than we could reach up and try to press a button. So, it's really been a remarkable journey to watch the progress, both as a patient, but also in working with my patients over the last 20 years is, when I first graduated, hearing aids, oftentimes they were not programmable by a computer. They had these little trap doors you had to open and twist a little screwdriver to adjust a trim pot. And oftentimes it was really a lot of guesswork, versus these days they're programmed with computers and really can be adjusted to a patient's specific hearing loss. So it's been a fun journey. I'm sorry, what?
They're kind of like smart sensors.
They are really. And there's actually a couple of hearing aid manufacturers that have come out with trackers, so they can do, like step counting. There's a couple of monitors for, it's basically got like a built-in gyroscope. So if the patient falls, there's a motion detector sensor within the hearing aid. And so if the patient falls over, then the hearing aid detects like, okay, we're over, and it will send a text message or an emergency alert to family members, caregivers. So they're really much smarter than they ever used to be. It's been amazing.
I find technology in medicine have gone to whole new levels. Even the over-the-counter like smartwatches people have, they'll do anything. But now, like, it's like you were saying how things have improved. There's people that have like pacemakers and they have an app on their phone where it reads out and tells you something and it sends alerts to their doctor. Now, do hearing aids have things like that now, or are they getting to that point?
They actually, many of them already have it. So there's many of the manufacturers have apps, smartphone apps that you can download and sync to the hearing devices. So if you wanted to, adjust for a setting. So an example that comes to mind is if you have maybe a grandparent that's driving their grandchildren to school, and now the kids are in the back seat, and the grandparent may, be having a little bit more trouble understanding them. They can change their hearing aid to focus in the rear, which is, not a situation you would find very often, but that specific instance of, small voices in the back seat, that can give that person a lot more clarity of what's coming in from behind them. And obviously, just the road noise in front of them is not as important. So there are those apps and adjustments that can be made that way.
That's amazing. I mean, that's such technology in some ways has hurt us, but in the last few years, it's helped us.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah, obviously when I'm scrolling through social media at night mindlessly, not so much helping me, more like, just a waste of time.
Fair enough.
But this like connection, we are in two completely different cities right now that are about an hour away.
Right.
But we can connect to a whole bunch of people all over.
Yeah.
Whereas before, this isn't something we would think about as much.
Yeah. And, and there's been some, in that same vein, there's been a lot of remote care and telehealth, especially because of the COVID-19 pandemic, that has been implemented into hearing healthcare. So in the same kind of mindset that those hearing aids can be connected to a smartphone and do apps that way for adjustments, there are also what's called remote care apps, where a patient can download an app on their phone and then connect in with their healthcare provider, with their hearing healthcare provider, to do a remote care adjustments and programming. So there's been the COVID-19 pandemic, there's obviously very many changes that have happened because of that. But in hearing healthcare, it really kind of fueled a push forward to allow patients to have more autonomy and say in their appointments and visits with their providers.
Well, that sounds like we have a positive step forward with something.
Indeed.
So we were talking about how May is Better Hearing and Speech Month. What is the exact, how is it promoted? How does the message get out there? Is there like a theme every year? Because I know some, like with MS awareness, they usually pick some sort of theme. Do you guys do things like that? Or is it just general knowledge?
I think it's a little bit of, kind of a grassroots. Even though there are some national professional organizations for both audiology and speech pathology, and those organizations will have, I think this year the theme for 2022 is Be Connected. So talking about how the issues that people can have either with hearing or with speech production, so including stuttering and that sort of thing, can impact their ability to connect to other people in ways that clinicians, both speech pathologists and audiologists, can help them overcome those barriers. So I think a lot of it is done at the grassroots kind of, individual providers level. So our state associations will kind of give out, the big announcements and kind of some infographics, that sort of thing. But then the individual providers kind of take it upon themselves to educate their community about the importance and, things like the, press releases and that sort of thing that we do to call attention to how important it is to be aware of and treat those conditions.
So when you come in, as we get older, we all lose a little bit of our hearing, right?
Most people do. I mean, most of the time some people every now and then, it always kind of amazes me. Sometimes I'll have someone come in and it's their very first hearing test. They've never had one before. And they'll be in the, mid 90s, and they'll say, well, my doctor just sent me in because I've never done this. I'm like, okay, are you having any trouble? And they're like, no, I'm good. And so every now and then I'll test someone and they have perfectly normal hearing. So I'm like, wow, that's really cool. Good for you. Great genes, no noise exposure. And those are usually pretty rare. The vast majority of the people, by the time they get into their 70s, 80s, and certainly into the 90s, there is some hearing loss that's beginning to happen there.
I mean, I know our ability to hear like certain high-pitched noises and things changes with each decade. Did I get that right?
You did. Yes.
So why is that? Is there some sort of, is it just as we get older? Like, are the things we tune into more? Is it hormonal? Is it just developmental? Do you know?
No, I think it's a little, there's it's kind of multifactorial, I think. So there's the aspect of just aging itself. So within the auditory system, so there are there's a cochlea, so my snail shell that I have there. There's the ammonite is sort of a replication of that. There's this spiral shaped organ within the temporal lobe of the brain, of the skull, called the cochlea, and that's the organ of hearing. And the way that it primarily works is there are little hair cells inside there that, if you picture like seaweed on the bottom of the ocean floor, so that organ is filled with fluid. And so whenever there's a sound, it deflects these little hair cells. And that's kind of how our brains detect sound. So in the presence of loud noise, so like if you go to a concert and you walk out and, maybe it was a really good concert and you're, 19 and this is when you do that. And you walk out and you feel like your ears are ringing and your hearing feels a little muffled for a few hours. That's a sign that that noise that you were exposed to for whatever length of time has damaged some of those little hair cells. Because if there's a soft sound, they just kind of gently deflect. But if there's something really loud, it can damage them. So there's sort of this cumulative effect of noise exposure that happens over time. And most babies, when they're born, they can hear out to about 20,000 hertz, which is really, really, really high pitch. And usually by the time you hit midlife, you can no longer hear those sounds. So there's just this wear and tear that kind of happens through our lifetime from just living in a world where there's a lot of noise.
Well, yeah, I imagine if you live in a city, it must be even worse because, I visited cities or stayed in them, and the noise, like you can't sleep because there's so much noise.
Yeah. And it's the opposite is true for those people that, kind of grew up in that, or they lived in that for years and years, and then they come out of it, they, maybe are visiting an area that's not as noisy and they say, I can't sleep. It's too quiet. So it's sort of it's all in what you're used to. But I have definitely seen patients, because of our proximity here in Massachusetts to, New York, we've definitely seen retirees that lived in New York City. And, they'll come in and they have these, some of them will have really significant hearing losses. And we're kind of going back and reconstructing history. There's no family history. They've had no other potential reason that they would have this hearing loss, but they rode the subway back and forth to work every day. And I don't know if you've had a chance to be on the subway in New York, the when the thing stops, those brakes screech, and it's like, oh, how do people do this? And just that level of wear and tear on the auditory system takes its toll.
Not to mention all the car horns and people yelling to every. I love New York City. Please don't think that I don't. Everyone that's listening from there and watching, I love New York City. I can't wait to go back when I start traveling more. I'm getting out more and more. But yeah, all that noise is got to be something that if you're continually exposed to it, because you're talking about concerts. I remember when in college and in my 20s, doing things like that, and you leave and you feel like your ears are like just ringing.
Yeah.
You had fun, but your ears are ringing.
Right. Yeah. And that oftentimes indicates, what the term for that is oftentimes a temporary threshold shift. So if you had, walked into an audiologist office and tried to do a hearing test right then, most likely your hearing would be a little bit decreased temporarily, just because of that level of noise exposure.
So when a patient comes to see you, what can they expect? Like, what is the first step other than a hearing test? How do we proceed? Like, is it like the eye doctor? We go, you do a few tests, and then you send us on our way for a checkup, or do people always come to see you because there's a reason?
Well, usually, sometimes people come in just to establish a baseline test, which we actually encourage people to do. One of our professional organizations has a slogan of "Test your ears by 50 years." So if you've never had a baseline hearing test by the age of 50, it's a good idea to get one. And so some people come in, they're just like, I've never had one short of that test I did in grade school when I raised my hand. And so we'll do that baseline test just to establish where they are. So what generally happens though is people, they have noticed that they're asking people to repeat themselves, or maybe family members have said, you should go get your hearing tested. And so people will come in, and the first thing that happens is we just, kind of talk about the history of, how much noise have you been exposed to? What medications have you had? A lot of people's occupations, if someone is works in an industry where there's a lot of loud noise exposure, that kind of lets us know, what sorts of sounds they might have been exposed to. If they have noisy hobbies, so some people, target shooting, shooting guns, and that's hunting. So all of that kind of loud noise takes its toll as well. And then the other thing we review with patients is their medications, or any medication they may have had in the past, because there are some, not all obviously, chemotherapy agents that can cause hearing loss. There's some antibiotics that can cause hearing loss. So we just kind of do a detailed review of symptoms and issues that people may have had in the past. And then the next component that we do is sort of an exam of the ear. So we check in with the otoscope. We check in the ear to make sure that there's no wax buildup or any sign of infection. One of the nice things about our office is that if someone does have a buildup of wax that might be contributing, we oftentimes can take that out prior to doing the hearing test. So that's one of the services that we offer. And then there's the part of the hearing test where most people are kind of used to, where you're in the booth and you're pressing the button when you hear sounds. We also do testing, sort of a functional assessment for what people are noticing with their hearing. So we'll have people repeat words at different levels, both in quiet and in background noise, because a lot of times people will say, I seem to hear okay one-on-one, but if I go into a restaurant or somewhere where there's crowd and other sounds, then it becomes more difficult. So we have tests that we can do to kind of tease that out. And usually once we've done that test, and everything's completed, we'll go over the test results with the patient, give them any recommendations that might be warranted. If they have a significant hearing loss and they're interested in trying hearing aids, we do have demos available in the office where we can program those and let patients listen and see, does this sound different? Because most of the time, I've been wearing hearing aids for more than 40 years, and I can explain to someone, what does it sound like? How is it different? But until you actually put a pair in your ears and listen to the difference, it can be really hard to imagine what you're missing.
They're like, oh my goodness, the world is clearer again.
Yeah. And that's really, most people say, wow, I didn't realize, I hear a fan noise. Like, yeah, that's the air conditioner or the heat, whatever the case may be. So it's really eye-opening for a lot of people when they hear what they've been missing.
That's kind of impressive. I mean, I know we talked about, with people wearing masks and you can't see people's lips and you can't see. I was in a crowded room and we still had to wear masks indoors. And I realized that all of us can't really hear each other because it was so loud where we were.
Yeah.
And we're wearing masks. And I realized that the first thing everyone does is start to stare at you. Like you can hear with your eyes or something.
Yeah. There's a lot of information that people gather, whether or not there's hearing loss, is when you're, especially in a challenging listening environment where there's a lot of background noise. A lot of times what happens is we start paying attention to the person's lips and their teeth, because then you can start to use those visual cues to help you tease out what are they saying. So like if you mishear, something like 50 versus 60, those look different, but if you can't see the lips, they sound really close.
Yeah, I can only imagine what it's like for people that read lips or kids that are in school and they had to wear masks all day.
Yeah.
How does that help? Like, is there technology for kids now that they can use when they're at school that have hearing loss?
There is, yeah. So kids that have hearing loss oftentimes also have, as part of their individualized education plan, and oftentimes this is kind of set up by an educational audiologist, or a teacher of the deaf, where patient or kids would have the hearing aids, but they would also have a separate little receiver that would allow them to hear the teacher better, because the teacher then could wear a remote microphone. And so that way, even in the din of that competing background noise, because classrooms we know are just kind of generally noisy, even if it's, a bunch of well-behaved kids, people shuffle around. And so then what happens is that microphone allows the kid to hear the teacher's voice over the din of the surrounding noise.
That's impressive. Now I think about you telling us turning up your hearing aid when you're in school. Now these kids have other avenues to learn and not feel so frustrated. I gotta imagine as a kid you felt frustrated in school.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I can remember as a kid, the process of, getting hearing aids. And I had also, kind of speech therapy because of that too. So I can remember, going down the hall with the speech therapist on I think it was like a weekly basis. And, obviously all great things. It turned out to, be very beneficial, but there's a little bit of stigma associated, like, oh, I'm the only one going to this now, So, I can remember, and, there's always those aspects of, kids always find something, especially, the teenager, pre-tween kind of years, when, the little cliques and that kind of thing are getting formed. And I can remember, all kids get picked on for something. And I remember as a kid, my picked on was that they called me hearing aid girl, which is not very imaginative, but
we were clever kids, but
yeah, there's always something, 4 eyes, whatever, for kids with glasses. But, it now that I'm, an adult and as, audiologist, it's kind of like, oh yeah, I am the hearing aid girl. This is what I do. This is how I help my patients. So it's been a positive process to turn a negative into something that was very good.
Well, that's the nice way to look at. I know kids sometimes the worst. I mean, they'll find anything to make fun of. It for me, it was my hair.
Oh, got it.
Because actually, I don't wear my hair curly, but I got caught in the rain earlier.
Oh, gotcha.
So I had my hair blown out straight, but I got caught in the rain, so forget it. So I had to do it.
Yeah.
But I didn't have time to do it because it takes me 2 hours to actually do my hair straight.
Oh, yeah.
Who has that kind of time?
Yeah.
So I was looking at all the hearing things that they have. What are the most common disorders that you treat?
I think the typical diagnosis that we oftentimes see is patients that have what's called sensory hearing loss. So typically it's age related or genetic, sort of a familial disposition. Sometimes people say, oh yeah, my sister has hearing aids and my mom wore them, and I remember her dad had them. And so we tend to see those patterns kind of run in families. And there are some people that have hearing loss because of ear infections and that sort of thing. So when we see that type of hearing loss, then we know that, hearing aids obviously are not the answer there. Those patients should be referred to their primary care provider or an ear, nose, and throat physician that can then treat them medically with, antibiotics or whatever it might take to treat up those infections.
Wow. I mean, I guess there's all kinds of different things. Now, we have been talking with Dr. Jennifer Sowards, so we're going to have a message from our sponsor, and we'll be right back to talk more about audiology and our hearing.
Hi, I'm Liz Teresa. I help women launch and build online businesses they love.
I needed to give my brand a web presence, but I didn't speak tech. Enter Liz Teresa. With lightning speed, she got the essence of my brand. Her guidance notes, her tips were practical and concrete.
She's the #1 person in my life. I'm so happy she came to me.
So thank you, Liz Teresa. I am so excited to keep working with you.
And we're back with Dr. Jennifer Sowards, an audiologist, because May is Hearing and Speech Awareness Month, which I have to keep remembering to add both of them in there when I say it. I want this right. So we've been talking a lot about our hearing and what to expect and how to treat it. Now, what happens, how much schooling did you have to have? Are there specialties in audiology, or is it just a general practice?
So with audiology, so most of the time, and this is part of why speech and hearing are kind of linked this month. So in undergrad, so post high school into college, most people that are going into this career will get an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree in what's called communication disorders. So it's a kind of a speech and hearing heavily focused on kind of head and neck anatomy, a lot of basic science, biology, chemistry sort of courses. So rounding out that undergraduate 4-year bachelor education. And then at that point, the person would decide, do I want to be a speech language pathologist or do I want to go into audiology? Most of the time, there's not a lot of question. It's sort of two very different kind of tracks. And most people, they're once they have a couple of those undergraduate speech and hearing science courses under their belt, there's one or the other really just kind of draws folks in. And at that point, if someone wanted to be a speech language pathologist, then they would go on to obtain either a master's or a doctorate degree in that field, versus for audiology, there used to be, you could go get a master's or a doctorate. But in the last 12, 15, 20 years, there's really been a big shift to where they realize as the scope of practice was expanding in audiology, they realized they couldn't really kind of pack that all into a 2-year master's program any longer. So they expanded it into a 4-year doctoral program. So at that point, the student would apply to a Doctorate of Audiology program. So we're not physicians, so we don't have an MD title. It's AuD. So it's a clinical doctorate, much like, optometry or something like that. So it's really focused on the ear and the hearing and that mechanism. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize that audiologists can do, there are those of us that work with adults. There are those of us that work exclusively with kids as sort of educational audiologists. There are people that do intraoperative monitoring of nerves. So for example, if someone had a tumor resection that they were doing and they wanted to be careful and preserve, obviously, the facial nerve functioning. An audiologist may be in there monitoring the facial nerve, the auditory nerve, to make sure that that stays intact during those surgical procedures. So, I have a couple of colleagues that just do intraoperative monitoring. It's in ORs. It's very fascinating. And then there are audiologists that just do vestibular work. So they work with patients that are dizzy and have hearing and balance related concerns, vertigo. So there's really, within the field, there's a lot of different specialties that people can kind of delve into.
So there are options for you. If you want to become an audiologist, you can do so many different things in your field.
Yeah. It's a great field, very interesting, especially if someone enjoys kind of science and anatomy. It's really a fascinating field, and I think as cheesy as it is, it really is very rewarding to be able to help people hear better. I don't think there's many jobs where, at the end of a visit, your patients are high-fiving you and giving you hugs pre-COVID, because they're so appreciative of how you've improved their ability to communicate with their family and with their loved ones. They're like, you gave me my life back. So it's very rewarding work to be able to help people do that.
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with loving your work and loving your patients. I love my clients. I love when I see them have a breakthrough and they're happy and healthy and they finally understand what it means to be healthy. And it's a rewarding thing. And they say if you love your job, you'll never work a day in your life.
It's
true. I don't necessarily believe that completely, because I really don't like paperwork stuff.
Fair enough. There's always billing or something to be done.
Yeah, things that I never loved, but I do love everything else about my job. Now, you've been in audiology for about 20 years now, you said, which is mind-boggling. So you've seen the field evolve over time. And I mean, there's so many medical breakthroughs. Now, what if somebody you said there's like chemo drugs and things. Are audiologists involved in like helping that, like on a clinical side? If there were side effects, would you guys be involved in studies and things as well?
So a lot of times patients that are doing chemo with drugs that are known to be ototoxic, is they will have an audiologist as usually in part of a hospital-based inpatient, or outpatient clinic, that is doing ototoxicity monitoring. So the patient will be getting their treatment, but then periodically they'll have a baseline hearing test before the chemo starts, and then they'll have periodic testing throughout. And at that point, it's the audiologist's job, if they do see some significant changes, to then let the oncologist or the doctor know that there's some things here that look like the patient's hearing may be suffering because of this treatment. And at that point, the oncologist and the patient would need to have a discussion. Do we lower the dose? Watch the possibilities there. And sometimes it's a not an easy decision to make, but certainly audiologists would be involved in that. And then at the end, if the patient ends up with a permanent hearing loss that's irreversible at that point, because they weren't, either they weren't able to preserve the hearing as much as they may have liked to, at that point, the audiologist would be involved in, fitting and dispensing hearing aids and making sure that those were appropriately fit and verified for the patient's hearing loss.
It's so amazing that we don't think about our hearing until we start losing it, or it starts affecting our life in some way. I guess we take things for granted.
Very much so.
Do you find that when people come in, they are always doing no, I'm fine, everything's fine?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, hearing loss it sneaks up on people. They oftentimes don't realize that they're having as much trouble as they are, because they don't know what they don't hear. So like, there's sort of it's could have, there's various little jokes that go around. But there's, the situation where maybe someone says, oh, what time is it? And the person said, oh, we're having turkey for dinner. And they totally misunderstood. But the person with the hearing loss that misunderstood, they don't know. They just answered the question and they go on about their business. So sometimes it's the people around the person that notice it first. They may, you may walk into someone's house, a family member that might be having difficulty, and you go, wow, that's TV's really loud. And the person with the hearing loss, they say, no, it's not. It's fine. I just, it's not loud, but to them it's not. So it really is hard for people to realize it. I think one of the things I probably hear most commonly is people say, well, I don't have hearing loss. I can hear things. I just can't understand. But that's still a sign that there's some deficits in the range of hearing. So oftentimes people have hearing loss in the high frequencies, which is kind of like the tinnier treble side of sound. And when that happens, they can hear sounds, the, bass, drums, trucks going by, like, oh, I hear the trash truck coming. I don't have hearing loss. But then they can't understand what you're saying to them because of that high frequency hearing loss. And oftentimes what happens there is they're mishearing or not hearing a lot of the consonants of speech. So sounds like S and SH and T get sort of fuzzy. So they'll mishear more than they don't hear. So, did you say sit or fit or hit? And a lot of what they think they heard rhymes really well with what was said, but it's just not quite right.
Yeah, I can only imagine what something happens. But to be fair, I will give people the benefit of the doubt. I asked my mom a question and she answers the wrong thing, but that's mostly because she's not paying attention to me.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So I think that may be a mom skill at some point. I don't know if your kids are getting older. Yeah, they might just like have selective hearing, or you're focused on something else and you just kind of like half listen to something we say.
Right.
So that may be a mom skill down the line. So I don't know if that's necessarily a hearing loss thing all the time.
Right. Certainly, attention plays a big role there.
So we want to make sure. So what are the steps someone should take if they want to just get the baseline test and to see how they need to do it? What if they think that they're having problems now after seeing this? What are the next steps for them?
I'd say the very best thing to do is to consult with an audiologist. So if you don't know of one, maybe reach out to your primary care provider and ask them, is there a reputable audiologist that you would recommend that I see? The other option is there's a couple of professional organizations. So the American Academy of Audiology, the Academy of Doctors of Audiology. Those are kind of two different websites, professional organizations where people could go in, type their zip code, and find a list of providers that could do that baseline test and advise them and make those recommendations for next steps.
Well, that's good to know that no matter where we live, we can go and look up somebody that's in our area. Just type in your zip code and check to see if they're in your insurance provider or whatever it is you guys got to do, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And oftentimes, most audiologists are credentialed with the vast majority of local health insurance plans. Our clinic is credentialed with most of the major insurance companies, including Mass Health. So there are, those Medicaid programs that will also cover the evaluation as needed.
There is one point that we were chatting about before we started, that there's a difference between seeing you, an audiologist that helps with them, and then places that are more, I'm trying to think of the right words, like a frequency clinic that just kind of sees hearing aids and they do it. How can people know the difference? I
think there's different, kind of models of delivery out in the hearing healthcare industry. And I think one of the ways that patients can make sure that they're seeing a licensed provider is to seek out an audiologist. So for someone that's in Massachusetts, they can look up on the Massachusetts state licensing website for audiology under the Board of Health. They can look up and see, again, another way to search zip code. But I think the key word there is audiologist, because that's really the medical profession that's trained and well-versed in being able to appropriately treat and verify if someone has hearing loss and make sure that it's done correctly.
So there you go, everyone. You hear that? So we can go probably to any state board of health, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Doctors, you could probably do that for any doctor in any field, really, right?
Yeah. So, certainly I think for physicians, everyone has to have, a state license within the state that they're practicing. So I think, anytime that you're not sure, the key word there that you want to ask is I want to see an audiologist.
Perfect. So do you have any last thoughts of us before we say goodbye? Any last parting wisdom for everyone?
I think just, being, especially the one type of hearing loss that is preventable is noise-induced hearing loss. So I know spring is upon us, once the rain subsides today, and you see a lot of people out with their lawnmowers and leaf blowers and that sort of thing. And that equipment can get really loud. So I think one important factor is to make sure that if people are doing or around any kind of loud equipment like that they wear either ear muffs or earplugs, the little foam earplugs, to protect their hearing from those loud noises.
Thank you, Dr. Jennifer.
Of course, you're welcome, Ashley. Thank you.
I am so happy that you're able to come on and teach us about hearing and the things that we can prevent. And now we need to know when we're doing our yard work, we need to be a little more mindful of those things, especially now that spring is here.
Yes.
And I promise in New England, we will have some nice days eventually. If you're
Let's hope so. Yes.
So thank you for joining us, and we will talk soon.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Wasn't that interesting, everyone? We got to hear all kinds of things. I learned some things. You learned some things. So make sure that we are making our baseline hearing tests for when we get older. So maybe that's something we want to look at. And if you have any senior relatives, look for audiologists for them if they need help. So after these messages, we will be right back, and I will be making some Mexican chocolate brownies. Cinco de Mayo is tomorrow, and I figured everyone else can have the salsas and fajitas. We're going straight for the chocolate today. Okay, so usually I have the food cam set up and all that, but I'm baking today, so you don't really need to see me mixing a batter because that's kind of boring, right? I'll show you what it looks like when I do it. So I have about 2 cups of gluten-free flour and a quarter cup, actually a half a cup, sorry, of almond meal. We want to put a little protein in it, and the nutty taste is delicious in these. So we're going to whisk that together. I have a hefty pinch of sea salt and 1 teaspoon of baking powder. Now, typically, I'm going to mix this together. I am going to start the microwave. I almost forgot. I set the timer. And what do? I forget. I got to melt the coconut oil that's going in every time. Last time I had to put butter in a recipe, I forgot I had it in the freezer. Had to do the whole grating. If you ever have butter that's in the freezer and you need it for a recipe and you need it to come to room temperature quickly, even if it's in the refrigerator, take a handheld grater and grate it, and it'll come to room temperature super quick. Anyways, back to our lovely recipe. You're mixing everything in. Now, these are my Mexican spices. I have a Mexican cinnamon, and I have a little bit of cayenne and an ancho chili powder. which ancho is kind of like almost like a raisiny type thing. It has a bit of sweetness to it. It's a mild, mellowed out chili. And the heat that we get from an ancho chili is almost sweeter than you would any other pepper, but the burst a little bit of heat comes from the cayenne. So we're gonna mix that in. You can also buy chocolate if you want to cut it up in there. That comes with these spices already in it. So we're gonna mix this together. Whisk, whisk, whisk. Why do we whisk all the dry ingredients together? So we don't get a big bite of cinnamon or a big clump of baking powder in one section. We want everything to be well combined. All right. So I have, oops, that's my fault. Yeah, the coconut oil. I have coconut sugar. I have a cup of coconut sugar I'm going to mix in. All right. You can use any sugar you want, but we all know, I've been telling you guys, coconut sugar is sustainable, which is amazing. We want more sustainable things in our lives. Now, I have a half a cup of the cacao powder, which anyone that's watched me regularly knows I talk about the unrefined things in cocoa. This is cacao powder. So cocoa that we get at the grocery store is a processed version of cacao. Cacao is what has the health benefits. So we have a half a cup of the cacao, which is delicious, by the way. It's also really great in smoothies. I add it to my smoothie every once in a while when I feel like I want a little extra something with some almond butter and bananas. Oh, it's wonderful. All right, we're gonna mix that all together. And I'm gonna pour in my wet ingredients. So you can use either a cup of milk that you have, any kind of milk you like, but I'm gonna do I'm adding in a cup of coconut oil, which is basically something that has to be in the recipe. But what I'm replacing the milk with is yogurt. I actually am using some vanilla yogurt. Mostly the reason I'm using the vanilla yogurt is because I ran out of vanilla and I forgot to buy some at the store. I'm so focused on getting everything for my Cinco de Mayo celebration that I forgot. So we are going to use some vanilla yogurt as a replacement for the milk in the recipe. There's so many things you can replace milk with in baking recipes. Things like, let's see, any alternative milk you can do. You can use half and half coconut milk, sweetened condensed milk, evaporated milk. But just know anything that you use will change the flavor. So you might want to just know that the density will change and the flavor will change just a little bit. All right. Ooh, I can already smell that cinnamon. So it's going to be a very thick batter like this. Oh, it smells so good. So there are no eggs in it. I would dive head first into it, but raw flour isn't really good for your tummy. So we don't want that. So we're going to put it in a 8x8 grease pan I have here, just with a little bit of cooking spray, nothing too major. We're going to spread it out evenly, and we're going to bake it for about 32 to 35 minutes until it's set and even in the middle. It's going to do that little like bubbly thing in the middle. I like that. And it'll get nice and crunchy on the edges, which is one of my favorite things. I'm a corner girl when it comes to brownies. I don't know about the rest of you, but the corners are like my jam. So we're going to get the rest of the batter in. Perfect. And I like to smooth it out so that's nice and even. We don't want any like extra thick spots. It won't cook evenly if we don't try to get it at least a little bit smooth. As you can see here. If you wanted, you could decorate the top with nuts or some extra chocolate chips or chunks of chocolate, whatever is your favorite thing to do. So I'm going to bake these, and as always, you can go to my Instagram page, Bella Foodie 7, to see what it looks like later on tonight. Now, I want to talk to you guys about a few things. A little reminder, We have an event coming up in Rhode Island. Yes, Rhode Island. It is for the Heart Association of Southern New England. It's called Food for Your Heart. You guys can come down, sample some amazing food from some amazing chefs. We're turning classic comfort food into heart-healthy dishes. There's going to be some cocktails from local vendors. There's beer from the Trinity Beer Garden. They have some amazing things. If you're in Massachusetts, it's only an hour and a half away, so it's kind of a nice night to come and do it. It's a great way to kick off your Memorial Day weekend. It's on a Thursday night. Here is the link for the tickets. Go, click on them, check it out. If you can't do that, feel free to make a donation. So I hope to see you there. I'm hoping to maybe get to meet some of you guys in person. All right. So next week, we have a lovely guest that I am so excited about, which, let's face it, I'm excited about all my guests, but she has the coolest blog, and I hope she would enjoy these brownies because she's an amazing baker. So I hope you guys all tune in. You enjoy your night, enjoy your Wednesday. Be responsible on Cinco de Mayo, everyone, and have a margarita for me.